Monsieur le maire de Milan, Monsieur le président de l'université, Monsieur le vice-président de l'université, Monsieur le recteur, Mesdames et Messieurs les administrateurs de l'université, Monsieur le gouverneur de la Banque centrale d'Italie, Mesdames et Messieurs les professeurs, Mesdames, Mesdemoiselles et Messieurs les étudiants, et comme le disait le président Giscard d'Estaing, honorables représentants élus et désignés, chers amis. Buongiorno. Mon italien s'arrête là. President Mario Monti, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm ever so pleased to see that there are still some instances and forums in the world where France ranks first ahead of Germany and China. Bocconi is one of those. Distinguished professors, students and guests, thank you very much for welcoming me here today. In coming to Bocconi today, I realize how privileged I am, but you have to realize that I'm paying a debt and honoring a promise. The promise I made to President Monti when he asked me a few years ago if I would consider coming to Milan to participate in this inaugural day of the university. And when I make a promise, I try to deliver. I'm doing that today. That's for the promise, but I'm also honoring a debt. You probably do not know that the state of Italy in the beginning of the second half of 2011 coincided with the beginning of my term as managing director of the IMF. And it triggered probably one of the largest fundraising campaigns that the IMF had ever undertaken. And I did so trying to raise over $400 billion. I did so because I feared when I started my job, my mission as head of the IMF, that Italy, this beautiful country, might just be the next in line to come to the IMF, not to relinquish part of its national sovereignty, because this is not the business of the IMF, to take away sovereignty, but to enter into a partnership where significant funding would be needed, and probably more so than would have otherwise been available. So I hit the road with my bag and collected a significant amount of loans, bilateral loans, in order to strengthen the financial status of the IMF. But thanks to very courageous action taken by you, President Monti, as my colleague in those days, as Minister of Finance for this country, and in charge of the highest responsibility, that threat that the finances of the IMF could be drawn upon disappeared. So I'm here honoring my promise and paying off a debt that maybe you didn't know so much about. So it is a great honor to deliver this inaugural address for this academic year at Bocconi, one of the most prestigious universities in Europe and indeed the world, as you, Mr. Rector, very well and very eloquently demonstrated. What I admire most about Bocconi University is not so much its academic and intellectual excellence. What I admire on the top of it is its true global reach, demonstrated by all the charts that you have been seeing. Global reach in its curricula, global reach in its culture, global reach in its values, global reach in its student population, more than 30 different nationalities, global reach in its professorial body, more than 80 different nationalities. And this spirit of tolerance and multilateralism is what I admire, and it runs in the DNA of Bocconi. And I hope that you will agree with me to recognize that we share that DNA and we are very much alike in that respect. It is also a great pleasure for me to be back in Milano. And every time I return to Milano, I remember the days when I came as a little girl with my parents, who always took us, much to our regret in those days, to visit churches, cathedrals, and museums. But I do remember that first visit to Santa Maria delle Grazie, and of what I saw there as the genius of Leonardo Da Vinci. It is true that he left his mark in many cities during his lifetime, but it was really in Milano that he expanded his talent, his genius, and allowed it to flourish. Da Vinci was not only the quintessential Renaissance man, a multi-talented visionary well ahead of his time, but he was a leader of all times, inventing geographical and social mobility from Firenze to Clos-Lucé, and reinventing himself over the course of time. He dared the future by challenging the present, and he was not shy to challenge others. And I was struck by this one quote of his, which I use now and again. When the ceiling is too low, when the thinking is too square. Ci poco pensa, molto era. I don't need to translate. But as I would like to talk a little bit about one of our favorite subjects, economy, I would like us to think a little bigger. And let us start, as he would, from a blank canvas and try to imagine the future. Now, normally when you start with a blank canvas and you try to paint the future, you use imagination, energy, hope. But these days, darker colors seem more in order. The gray clouds of entrenched, low growth, low inflation and high unemployment, especially among the young. This is what I call the dark clouds, the dark colors. How can we paint that canvas with more colors and less darkness? How can we move from Pierre Soulages to the new Michelangelo of tomorrow? I'm troubled, as many of you are, by the stark contrast between the benefits and promises that education brings with it, here at Bocconi and elsewhere, and the harsh reality that many young adults face in the labor market. That they do not get the chance to apply their educated minds to the workplace, to hone the skills in the day-to-day work environment, or to gain the experience necessary to embark on successful careers. Now, I know, Mr. Rector, that this is less so in Bocconi, and I saw the excellent percentages of those who join the job market once they've graduated from this university. But not all universities are Bocconi, and it's not a specific problem to Italy, it's a problem that concerns the whole of Europe. And it is not just a cross for the young people to bear, it is a cross for society to bear. Persistent unemployment not only undermines economic activity, but it can tear at the fabric of society and institutions by breeding inequality and generating sometimes violence. It undermines the self-esteem of the best and the brightest. So tackling the problem of youth unemployment before it becomes a joint liability should be a shared responsibility. A shared responsibility between the government, the private sector, the youth, and society as a whole, at both the national and the European levels. And with this in mind, I would like to address that issue from three perspectives. First, let's take a deeper look at what exactly is the problem of youth unemployment. Second, let us see what remedies can be brought to bear at the national level. And third, let's envisage how the European dimension can actually sustain and help the national remedies. Today, unemployment among Italy's youth stands at more than 40%, the highest in almost 30 years. If the unemployed young people could form a region, it would be probably about as big as Umbria. Now, these numbers would not make Mona Lisa, La Gioconda, smile. She would frown. So, what we did is do a little bit of research, a little bit of analysis, a little bit of empirical work around the theme. And we are publishing this afternoon, actually, especially on the occasion of the inaugural opening of Bocconi University, we're publishing a special paper called Youth Unemployment in Advanced Europe, Searching for Solutions. And it will look at that very issue and will look at the various options, solutions, and the myriad of them that need to be used going forward. Two key messages arising out of this paper. Some of it very intuitive, but much better when demonstrated with actual empirical work and analysis. First of all, when growth is low, youth unemployment is high. On average, across advanced European countries, the impact of weak growth on youth is 3 times larger than that for the adult unemployed. Conventional wisdom is 2 times. It's not 2 times, it's 3 times. In fact, about 70% of the increase in youth unemployment in vulnerable countries during the crisis can actually be traced back to feeble growth prior to the financial crisis. What is the implication? Well, the implication is that reviving growth is a first-order priority. Our research shows that 1 additional percentage growth of GDP in Italy can lower the youth unemployment rate by 0.6 percentage point on a per annum basis. That's a lot of people going back to work, and it would be an important step forward. Second, institutions matter. In many countries, including Italy, youth unemployment was already quite high when the global crisis struck. The crisis simply made the situation worse. So why is that? Because certain labor market characteristics, such as high level of protection for workers on permanent contracts or large hiring costs, conspire against youth employment. And in countries such as Italy, they make youth unemployment even more sensitive to growth. That is demonstrated. So let me put these 2 findings in perspective and give you a sense of magnitude. From 1996 to 2001, Italy was able to reduce its unemployment rate by 7 percentage points by growing at an average rate of almost 2% per year. And that was a great achievement. The problem that we have at the moment, that we're facing, is that we forecast Italian growth for the few years to come at roughly 1 percentage point. At the same time, inflation remains persistently low, usually a clear sign that resources are underutilized. And low growth combined with low inflation is a very toxic mix. They create this vicious circle, because if you expect low growth in the future, if you expect prices to go down, you don't consume, you don't invest, you don't hire today. So overcoming this vicious cycle is the challenge, not only for Italy, but for Europe as well. And this is why we need to move the dark colors of the canvas aside. We need to think bold and colorful when we act, and action is needed on the structural reforms and institutional changes that could unleash Italy's productivity and growth. As the father of the third dimension that provided perspective and improved contrast, Leonardo revolutionized the way in which we conceive objects and innovate. So if he were to join us today, no doubt he would come to Bocconi. But instead of the third dimension, he would probably think of the three dimensions, far more convincing and appealing to the viewer. So let me try to apply three dimensions as well. My first one would be the labor market reform. The Italian labor market today suffers from what we call a duality, and others refer as insider versus outsiders. Insiders have permanent contracts with a high degree of protection, while outsiders, mostly young people, have limited protection, are hired on temporary contracts, and receive little training. They go from internship to apprenticeship to short-term contract and interim positions. Not only is it unfair, but it's inefficient. Companies have little incentives to invest in young people, to go for vocational training. And that is why the Jobs Act and its focus on creating a new labor contract with gradually increasing protection, not removing protection, anyway, there's a grandfather clause, but for future hires, is important to tackle pervasive duality and make the market work better for both workers and firms. Another important element of the Jobs Act is active labor market policies. And these include helping the unemployed to receive the training and job search assistance that they need. Does it work? Well, the study that we do and the work that we do with 188 countries around the world tells us that it does. If we look only within Europe, you look at Austria, you look at Finland, you look at Sweden, these three countries all show that these policies actually work. In Sweden, for instance, incentives for the young unemployed to actively seek jobs are paired with active job matching support and apprenticeship training wherever it's needed. But even then, the Jobs Act would need to be complemented with measures to lower the marginal tax rate, or the tax wedge, as we call it, which discourages investment in labor and capital. Despite recent efforts, the labor tax wedge in Italy remains well above the OECD average. So why is this important? Well, it's important because reducing the labor tax wedge in Italy only to the average European level could lower youth unemployment by some 4 conservative to 8 rather aggressive percentage points. That would mean anywhere from 60,000 to 130,000 young people having a job. New markets and more open markets could also be a powerful catalyst for job creation. For example, and this is the former lawyer talking here, opening up the legal profession, enhancing competition in the retail sector can boost productivity and facilitate movement of workers across sectors where they are most needed. I'm calling back Leonardo Da Vinci here. He changed locations and jobs quite frequently, moving from Firenze to Milan, to Rome, to Bologna, to Venice, to end up in Clos-Lucé in France, and reinventing himself in many instances, as a painter, as a sculptor, as an engineer, as an anatomist, as a musician, as a mathematician. A flexible and open market was essential for Da Vinci's entrepreneurial and innovative spirit to thrive. And this is the spirit and dynamism that we need to rekindle in Italy to create a rejuvenated Italy of the 21st century. So labor market was my first dimension. My second dimension is judicial reform. Let me tell you a story here. Again, this is the former lawyer who's coming back to me. When I joined my first law firm, where I grew up as a lawyer for 20 years, I started working on a case which involved the Italian subsidiary of a US paper mill manufacturer. And I stayed with that case for 10 years. Now, granted, there were a few elements of the case in France and many elements of the case in Italy. But if we combine the two judicial systems, raised a few exceptions, had a bit of exequatur problem along the way, the matter was alive for 10 years. Well, this is not a very sensible way to reduce and eliminate disputes, is it? I was happy because I was in defense. When you are the claimant, you're not so happy. So we all know, that lengthy judicial process is not helpful. It actually harms economic activity. It slows or reduces foreign direct investment. By some estimates, some of the disputes, particularly in the labor sector, take roughly 1,000 days in some parts of Italy, which is more than twice the OECD average. And the regional disparities between the south and the north are very large. For example, it takes less than 300 days to resolve a labor dispute in Piemonte or Trentino, but more than 1,000 days in Puglia or Sicilia, the regions that are facing some of the most challenging economic situations. So greater judicial efficiency would lower the cost of credit, encourage investment, and importantly, facilitate employment. In fact, our research on regional disparities should suggest that cutting in half the duration of labor dispute raises the probability of being employed by about 8%. Measures such as the online trial process, Processo Civile Telematico, forgive the accent, introduced earlier this year, can deliver important efficacy gains. The success of the Strasbourg program, adopted by the Torino court, is a powerful demonstration that developing court performance indicators can actually help increase judicial efficiency and accountability. Embedding this approach throughout the country could be a promising next step. And for those of you who are lawyers or will become lawyers, don't you believe that it will reduce your workload? It will make it more interesting, more challenging. That was my second dimension. First one, labor market reform. Second, judicial reform. The third dimension is the banking sector, where reform is needed to make it stronger, to support the recovery, especially for the small and medium-sized enterprises. And I'm not suggesting that the banking sector is in a bad shape. It's in pretty good shape, Monsieur le Gouverneur. But it is saddled with quite a bit of bad loans and constrained as a result in its ability to provide credit. The ECB's comprehensive assessment was an important step in outlining the magnitude of the problem and its potential remedies. So what needs to be done? We need insolvency regimes to help businesses and households clean up their balance sheets. The same is true for banks. Write-off rates need to be stepped up significantly to bring down bad debt ratios to pre-crisis levels. By the same token, reviving the small and medium enterprises sector can be crucial in facilitating a stronger recovery. SMEs in Italy are the backbone of the economy. They account for 80% of the private sector workforce and 70% of business value added. Still, because of high leverage and weak profitability, they are suffering more than large firms from the financial crisis. A broad strategy focused on restructuring the SME sector would be a powerful impetus to growth and job creation. So, first, second, third dimensions. One at a time? No, better three together. Because as was clearly demonstrated by the OECD, for instance, reforms conducted in combination are actually much more powerful. So we need to keep in our field of vision, in painting the canvas of strong, inclusive, and job-rich growth in Italy, those three dimensions together, the 3Ds, have to come in place together. Okay, let me bring out the European dimension now. And let us remind ourselves that Italy, founding member of Europe, has always been an anchor of European activity and stability. And the mutual prospects of Europe and Italy are intrinsically linked. President Monti, you will remember that whenever we faced a real inextricable problem, and I can think of a few when I was finance minister for my country, generally, the little light, the striking of the genius component came out of Italian minds. And I say that not because the IMF is writing it, because I remember and I was there. But coming back to our subject, for Italy's efforts to succeed, they must be complemented by a comprehensive strategy of the euro area. At that level, in order to support durable and sustainable recovery, the Eurozone, in our view, has to fire on all cylinders. And let me start with one, the monetary policy. It has been at the forefront of the policymaking landscape, and it needs to continue to play a crucial role in supporting demand. The ECB has taken bold steps in recent months, announcing significant outright purchases of private assets, for example. These measures should help prop up demand and fend off the risks from persistently low inflation. But if that low inflation was to endure, and if low growth remains the prospect, then certainly we are pleased to see that the ECB has indicated that it stands ready to expand its balance sheets even more, including through sensible purchase of sovereign assets. This is welcome, but monetary policy cannot go it alone. It will not be the silver bullet if it is not accompanied by other policies, one of which is the fiscal policy, which has to play a role, which has to be designed in such a way that it is growth and job friendly. And I'm not suggesting that it has to be complacent, and I'm not suggesting that there are many countries in the Eurozone that can afford to actually move in the direction of stimulating with the budget base. But it has to be designed to be growth and job friendly, and it can be so. Think, for instance, of a cost-effective, efficient pan-European public infrastructure projects that could help lay the foundations for sustained growth. Think of cross-border investments in transportation, communication, energy. or other digital networks. These are key ingredients to support innovation and productivity growth. I know that Italy has just documented such investment worth about 81 billion euros. Not all of them will be selected, of course, but this is a new music to the ears of the Europeans. Last, and very importantly, there is some flexibility within the established rules. The Stability and Growth Pact is not just a corseted, hard-wired set of constraints. It was sensibly drafted and allowed for flexibility in order to support, for instance, public investment and implementation of structural reforms that will be game changer. They will vary from country to country. They will not be the same. But they should include streamlining regulatory burdens, opening up markets and services markets such as energy, such as transportation, deepening capital markets and opening access to those capital markets to as many companies as possible, including the little ones, including those shoots, those startups that many of the students will one day consider. This flexibility should be explored, should be exploited in order to encourage productive outlays and measures to foster growth and job creation. I know, because I have sons your age who are students, who are looking for a job. And I know that your generation is facing some of the toughest prospects in a very long time. Unemployment, especially of the young, is a blemish on any society. It erodes talent, saps aspiration, and depletes dignity. It is a multifaceted problem and requires multi-pronged solution. And I urge you not to be lured by those who will tell you that it is simple. A flip of the currency, a close of the border, and the problem will be solved. It's far more complicated than that. And the study that we have conducted actually tries to identify precisely how many of those tools, how many of those reforms need to be conducted in order to open the job markets for you. The solutions I've laid out are neither in code nor are they spelt from right to left, so you will not need a mirror to decipher them. Cynics may say that reforms take too much time to be effective and that the immediate outlays are unduly high. But cynicism is a recipe for policy paralysis and economic inertia. A past that could very well be the prologue. We must take a different path. One path that begins with an honest assessment of the situation as it is, not as one would like to paint it for what it is not. A path that is not easy, a path that requires hard work rather than complacent compromises. A path that has the potential to bring about the changes that is needed to unleash the Italian potential. It is on that path, Mr. President, that you had embarked when I embarked on my own journey. Italy has so often demonstrated its resilience in the face of difficult circumstances. So today I appeal to you to bet on that new future. One where the Italian genius is once again unleashed, where creativity and dynamism are the hallmarks of broad-based prosperity among youth, among women, among entrepreneurs and all Italians. How would Da Vinci advise us today? Think of how many years it took him to complete the Last Supper. 4 years by some accounts? But if you put together all the maintenance and the renovation and the maintenance, many, many more years. So today, It remains yet one of the most extraordinary, inspiring, and beautiful pieces of art ever created. All tools should be used. Patience must be applied, but we must be determined in using those tools to the best of our ability in order to build what can be a brilliant future in the very heart of Europe for young generations. Thank you.